We are starting with chapter 21, section 2. Is that correct? Am I right on that?
Yes.
Okay. Chapter 21, section 2 is an interesting chapter. As I was talking to you about in the last section, progressives are people that are looking to change. After the American Revolution, government changed, but the way that business was done had not changed. Business during the American Revolution basically was very isolated. There were companies that did business with other places like Europe and England and things, but most of the business was concentrated here in the United States. So to a certain extent, business was done the same way it had been done for a long time. There hadn't been any changes. But now, as business is kind of taking a focal point in society, you see, the Civil War's over, it's done, and now people are getting back into the day-to-day and trying to see if they can move from where they are. They're trying to become better. They're trying to become wealthier. And the way that business was, to a certain extent, prevented that. Why? Well, let's talk about that. One of the things that you're here for, you're all here for what? What's the purpose of you being at Conchita Espinosa Academy? Yes?
To learn.
To learn. To be, and the word learn is to be educated. To receive an education. And why do we want to receive an education? Yes? To get better. To become knowledgeable in what it is that we're going to do for a living sometime down the road. You know, when we become adults, if we didn't learn, if you didn't go to school, if you didn't get an education, do you think that you're going to be doing better, okay, or bad?
Bad.
Bad. That's generally the feeling. Well, during this period of time, which is the turn of the century, boys and girls, as young as 7 years old, were working. They were out there working in different types of businesses. One of the chapters, and in one of the books that we've used here in the past, at the beginning, that portion that gives you some insight of what the section is going to be, is a reporter. And this reporter, another word of the vocabulary that we've been talking about, was a muckraker. What is a muckraker, Mr. Del Cal? You remember what that vocabulary word meant?
Oh, yeah. The bad stuff.
Okay, what about the bad stuff? Give me an example. Stay with that. Yes. Jacob Riis is an example, but isn't the definition of what a muckraker is? Yes.
Muckrakers are reporters that would get the bad information from the government that was doing stuff illegally and would put it in newspapers and give it to the public.
Okay. Muckrakers were reporters not only with the government, they looked at what was going on bad in society. Whether it was the government that was doing it or business that was doing it, and they reported it. Because many Americans didn't know what was going on. And they thought that their job was to reveal what was going on to the people on the street. There is a quote from the movie that we saw that said, Americans have to wake up because they're walking around sleeping, meaning that they're unaware of what's going on. And it was the job, in that case, of the New York Times reporter to tell Americans what was going on. So that's a muckraker. A muckraker, in this book that I read, had gone undercover. What does that mean, undercover? Undercover, yes.
Like he
It was a woman, by the way.
or she went unnoticed or unidentified.
She disguised herself. She assumed the personality of somebody else for the purpose of finding out the story. And she went undercover at a business that they worked, it was a textile business. You know what the word textile means?
Clothing.
Clothing business. But in this case, what that business actually did is it made the cloth In order to make cloth, you take a lot of yarn and you weave it with these big machines that kind of take yarn and make it into cloth. And they're very elaborate machines that work with a lot of pressure. Because you gotta get the yarn, and if you look at your clothing very closely and you look at it under a microscope, you see that it is a weave, but it's so close together that sometimes even when you drop water, it takes a while for the water to go through because the openings are so close together. That's what this particular business did. And she reported that she went in as a worker to see what was going on. And one day, she sees little hands over the machine kind of working what was going on. But she didn't see a body, it was like hands. And I think that she probably thought at the beginning, wow, this is a science fiction movie. These are just hands working. But as she got closer, what she found was a little 7-year-old that was on top of a milk carton. And she was so small that she couldn't reach over the counter, and she was kind of moving the things that needed to be moved in order to get these big, huge, monstrous machines working. Now, it surprised her. And it surprised her for a couple of things. Number one, do you think that she expected to have a 7-year-old actually working on things that adults do? No. She didn't expect a 7-year-old, no matter how small or how big it was, to be working. Two, what else do you think in that story would have surprised her? What else in that story? What would it surprise you if you saw that? Yes?
For working by the machinery.
Well, the machinery, because the machinery during this time, by the way, machineries have no safeguards. Let me tell you what the word safeguard is and how it relates to machines. Safeguards are put by the engineers that design these machines in order to prevent people from having accidents. For example, if it's a machine that uses a lot of wheels, a lot of cogs together, it may have something to protect it so that if your hair, obviously not my hair, but your hair, it falls down, it's not going to be caught into these wheels and drag you in. That would be a safeguard. Another safeguard, for example, with a saws, you know what an electric saw looks like, right? It has a blade that goes fast, round and round and round, and when you move it, it cuts wood and other material. Well, it cuts wood and other material, and it can cut your hand off too if you're not very careful. So the engineers that design these machines today place certain devices to prevent your hand to get in the way of the blade, to protect you. But during this period of time, there was no requirement that the manufacturers put in any safety devices. Why? Well, because working conditions were different. Today, if you get injured at work, then you go to the doctor and your employer basically provides for your care until you get better. Back then, if you got injured at work, this is what happened. Okay, get out of here, you now have his job, and somebody else would take his job, and if you got better or not, it didn't matter. Because employers weren't required to do anything about people that were injured at work. So that was a problem. The age of the child was a problem. Why don't we want 7-year-olds working? Why don't we want 7-year-olds working? I can just see your little brother working in these machines.
Because they may mess up.
Well, they may mess up, but that's not really the main function because the employer probably picked the best or the smartest 7-year-olds. If you can find one, yes?
They weren't as experienced, so if something wrong were to happen.
They weren't as experienced, but you're looking at it from the perspective, and those are good things, from the perspective of the employer. But what other perspective is there? Yes?
Will get hurt.
Will get hurt. Yes, Chum.
Like they would start maybe yelling at a loud noise and scare everyone, and they'd be like, oh! Like,
Okay. If you were a 7-year-old, do you think your parents would want you to be working in an adult job?
no.
Why not?
Because that might happen?
Because you're only 7.
Because you're only 7 and your parents really don't want you out there working. They want you to be where? School. So you can get what? Education. If you're busy working, you're not going to get an education. If you don't get an education, are you going to become wealthy someday?
No. Sir.
There's a possibility if you win the lottery, but other than that, without an education, without preparation, you're not going to get wealthy. And if our 7-year-olds immediately start working, they're not going to have the opportunities that you guys sitting in this classroom will have. And I know that you're all soon competing to what school you're going to go in, and one of the main factors that your parents are looking at is how good the school is in educating you. Because your parents want to give you the best advantage. But back then, 7-year-olds, their parents weren't looking for that. And what do you think that do you think that parents have changed that much from then to now?
Yes, sir.
Have they really?
Yes.
Do you think that parents care for you more now than then?
Yeah. Yes. Wait, no, no. Yeah, no.
Well, we're really talking about your great-great-great-grandparents, right? So, do you think your great-great-grandparents didn't like your grandparents? Cut for a second, please.